Another live stream. Today's topic is all things Washington. It'll be a deep dive into Washington State. We'll talk about what makes this region so interesting, so unique. It's very much an up and coming region. We're going to taste some wines. We're going to talk a little bit about the styles, what you can expect from Washington State. Now, recently, I was in Washington, and I'm up there every year on a work project. This time I stopped in to visit a friend of mine, Kerry Shiels, and we had a conversation. I tasted some wines. She is really a subject matter expert on Washington. So I was very pleased that she agreed to be on today's live stream. Hey, Kerry, how are you?
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much. Kerry, why don't you share a little bit about yourself? You've got such an impressive background. I think people would like to know a little bit more about you, and then we'll get into the live stream.
Sure. So I grew up in the Yakima Valley. My parents planted DeBrule Vineyard in 1992, and the Washington wine industry really, vineyards started going in the early to mid 90s. Wineries started coming in later. So my folks weren't first, but they were at the beginning of the exponential growth of Washington wine. And because I grew up in the industry, I started making wine. I needed a science project in 7th grade. So I made my first wine in 7th grade, made wine in middle school and high school. And I think when I was 17, I didn't want to spend my whole life in my small town. So I went and did a Rotary exchange year in Sweden. I did my undergrad at Northwestern in mechanical engineering. Then I got hired by Fiat, and I moved to Italy for a couple of years and worked in the automotive industry, making cars with prototypes, and then, which was super cool. And then I got transferred within the group, the Fiat group, came back to the US. I was living in Chicago, working for Case New Holland, which is agriculture and construction equipment. And I focused mainly on supply chain with mostly tractors, a little bit of light construction equipment. But I had gone from making cars by hand. And when I was in college, I did a lot of work in the machine shop, and I like to make stuff. And I found myself making spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and it was interesting because it was how the business works, which is great. But I found myself with too many spreadsheets, too many PowerPoints, too much time in Fargo in January and Georgia in July. And I gotta say, I actually really like Fargo, but not in January. It's really cold in January. And so I decided that wine is more fun than cars and tractors. Grapevines live in really nice parts of the world. And so I retired from engineering, applied to UC Davis, because when I was a kid, everybody who knew what they were doing, everybody who was a competent professional had gone to Davis. So I figured that's how you become a winemaker, is you go to UC Davis. So I applied to Davis, neglected to tell them how all the prereqs I was going to get all my prereqs in, because mechanical engineering is physics and math, and winemaking is basically pre-med. It's life sciences. So I had to go back and get all the chemistries and biologies and microbiologies and biochemistries and all those sorts of things. But I got them in, and because I'd already left my job, I ended up working harvest the first year, which was great. So I went to I started in Napa at Joseph Phelps, and then I went to Australia and worked at Tabilk in central Victoria, which has some vines from the 1860s.
What an amazing place.
It was so cool.
Oh, Tabilk is incredible.
I mean, you go to Australia and you think of it as the new world, and they have some of the oldest vines in the world and a cellar that's been around forever. And it's very classic, traditional sort of winemaking. And then I got to travel all around Australia. I spent a month in New Zealand on the way home. And I got back to California and I was ready to go to Davis. And I was talking to somebody who said, you only get so many harvests in your life. You can't miss one. And I said, well, that makes sense. I guess I should get a job in Napa. So I worked 4 days a week at Michael Mondavi's project, Folio, which I worked in the lab where we did a lot of custom crush, and we had a bunch of different brands. So a lot of different ways to look at how do you make wine, and if you're trying to accomplish this, you make those choices. If you're trying to accomplish this, you make those choices. So it was great for developing things like judgment, and seeing how a lot of people did things. And I had to go to school 3 days a week because I had 3 lab classes. So I was a full-time student and working full-time. That was a big year. So the following year, I decided to take the quarter off, and I just moved to Napa and worked at Robert Mondavi Winery. I was on the white winemaking team, and we had a capacity of 100 tons of white grapes every day. I now make 30, 40 tons in a vintage.
So Kerry, give everyone an idea. A ton of grapes equals how much finished wine?
60 cases.
There you go. Okay.
It's that engineering brain. I got all the math in.
That was not meant to trip you up, by the way.
No, it's an easy question. So the and that was great. And so then I graduated, finished my thesis, graduated on time. I got a travel grant, and so I ended up going down to Argentina in 2010, and I worked at Tepiz outside of Mendoza, which was a fabulous experience as well. Mendoza is really, it's also going back to, like, you go to the new world of Australia and end up with some of the oldest wines in the world. I went to Argentina, and I was thinking, I've seen Argentine wines on the shelves as long as I've seen Washington wines. How long have you been making wine here? And this is one of the dumbest questions I've ever asked in my entire life, to be clear. But because I said, how long have you been making wine in Argentina? And my enologists looked at each other and like, I don't know, when did the Spaniards get here? Like 500 years ago? Yeah, about 500 years ago. Yeah, so we've been making wine for 500 years. And because obviously the Spaniards, wherever they went, they took grapevines. And that's, I mean, the church took the grapes to Australia. And so all of these regions that we think of as New World wine regions are actually have long histories. And it's interesting how at the time Argentina was reinventing itself, because they made wine, but they never exported anything. And I mean, they drank more wine until the French for a long time. And so it's been really fascinating to have all of this global experience and then come home to the Yakima Valley, which is truly a young wine region, because in the US we were silly enough to have prohibition, and which damaged our own industry's growth and development. But so I came home after grad school. I came home in 2009, and I took off for 6 months in 2010. And then I've been home at DeBrule Vineyard in Cote Bonneville ever since.
So Kerry, how long have we known each other? Maybe 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so we met in Dallas at a major wine competition called Texum, and we've talked and connected every year at that event. And that's really what prompted me to come and visit you just a few weeks ago. You know, I don't want to waste too much time before we actually get into the wine tasting, but can you just give us a little bit of background story of how Washington State wine has gotten to the point that it's at today, just to give everyone a little bit of a feeling of, okay, this will level set, people's understanding of what's happening in Washington.
Sure. And to help with that, I've got a map of Washington, because I see in the chat not everybody's been to the Yakima Valley, but that's a solvable problem. We can fix that. You guys are all welcome to come. We look forward to hosting you. But it's helpful to know where we are. So this is Washington at large. And one of the things that people think of Seattle, if you haven't been here. Seattle's over here. It's on the water. There's this big range of mountains with the Cascades. So water comes off of the ocean, hits these mountains, and rains here, snows in the mountains. And then by the time it gets over here to us, there's more mountains over here. with the Rockies and the Blues. But by the time it gets to us here in the middle of the state, it's really dry. We get 8 to 11 inches of precipitation a year. That's like 250 millimeters of rain a year for those of you who aren't on the the imperial system. So it's super dry. The irrigation, a lot of irrigation canals, which brought that snow, the melting snow down so we have a lot of irrigated agriculture. Those went in initially at the early part of the 1900s, and there was a wine industry nascent here. Again, with Prohibition, that ended. Then we put in some more irrigation in the 50s, which opened up more areas on the hillsides. And there are grapes that go back there's a couple vineyards that go back to the 50s or the 70s, but really, like I said, the 90s is when vineyards here in the Yakima Valley. The Yakima Valley is the first AVA in the Pacific Northwest. It was founded in 1983. This is still one of the largest producing areas there's a lot of production of vineyards. There's just a lot of vineyards here. There's a lot of sites that have been identified, also good sites that have been identified. The other area where there's a lot of grapes that are growing is down here in the Horse Heaven Hills, up along the Columbia River. But basically this whole dry irrigated basin is the Columbia Valley. So everything that's shaded here is pretty much where we have water, where you can grow crops. And there's a lot of new AVAs that have come along in the last couple of years, but still I think the ones that people have really heard of are probably Yakima, the Horse Heavens, or Tasted, and Walla Walla, which is way over here. And half of that is actually in Oregon, and it's very distinct. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we get to Syrah. But that is where Washington is at. And again, in the vineyard plantings really started exploding in the 90s, and wineries really started exploding in the mid 2000s.
Kerry, talk a little bit about ungrafted vines. So I think that's an interesting bit in Washington.
Well, when we started the industry, it was really cold. And in the 80s and the early 90s, people were worried about global cooling. And even when I left California and came up to Washington, people thought I was moving up to Siberia, which we're at the same latitude as Bordeaux and Burgundy. So it's not exactly Siberia. But as part of protection against winter damage, if we get a freeze and the vines freeze all the way down to the ground, if you have rootstock, they would come back up with your rootstock instead of the Cabernet or whatever variety that you have on top of the vine. So combination of, and we didn't have phylloxera because it was a young region. So pretty much Washington is one of the few parts of the planet where most of the vines are actually planted on their own roots. And they did find phylloxera a couple of years ago. So there are people who are new vineyards are starting to go in with things like rootstock. Mm-hmm. But it's such a cool opportunity because if you're trying to show a sense of place, ungrafted vines give you a very unique, true sense of place. I mean, one of the things that when I was in California, I worked in a Pinot vineyard, and they had all these different clones and all these different rootstocks. And people talk, especially in Pinot, people talk about clones. Rootstock is far more impactful to how the vine grows than the clone. It's far more impactful, but nobody ever talks about it. And I liken it to when I was at Northwestern, they have a fantastic Russian literature department. So I took a lot of Russian lit just for fun and diversity, and read a lot of books. And I mean, I love Tolstoy. I've read different translations of the same story, and they're very different. It would be, but I can't read. I mean, I don't read Russian. I can't read Tolstoy, and I can't read Anna Karenina in the original language. So I need that translator, just like in most places, grapevines need the translator to express a sense of place. So it's a really interesting opportunity to, as a winemaker, to convey sense of place in a way that you can't do in many parts of the world.
Got it. So, Kerry, when I visit Washington and you're making the distinction of the coastline, Seattle, when you're west of the Cascades and you move east of the Cascades, I'm typically there in the wintertime, January, February. And I'll tell you this, there are times I will drive for 30 minutes, maybe see one or two cars, and oftentimes see more tumbleweeds going across the road versus other vehicles. So there are parts of this part of Washington that have almost like a lunar sort of landscape feel to it. It's dry, it's very windy, there's not a lot of trees. It's this rough, rugged, rocky sort of terrain. And when I visited you, we walked through a vineyard called De Brule. And I've got to say, it was almost like a religious-like experience. The vineyard is astounding, but it really does show the contrast that you can find in a relatively small, confined area. And I think it would be interesting if you can talk about that a little bit, because here you have grape varieties that are growing in close proximity to one another that some people may think, well, how does that really work? But because of the unique environment that you're in, it works extremely well.
Yes, because it is a desert, and because one of the things that you talk about it being like a lunar wasteland, because it's a desert, we have, one of the things you get with that is phenomenal light. And I have a photo of just, I love this sunset. This is not doctored. Like, this is the way sunset gets. This is, the colors on the hills are gorgeous. It's why Georgia O'Keeffe went to the desert to paint. And one of the things that you get in the desert is you get these giant diurnal temperature shifts from daytime to nighttime. And so because of that, microclimates matter so much. The other thing that's really unique is that if we go back to the map, you can see that the river valleys go, or all the wine regions and kind of the river valleys go east-west. And so that means we have south-facing hillsides all along here. But our vineyard, De Brule, it's a upthrust and it's a prominence. And you can see in this photo, like, this is looking south. So coming from the east, there's a really steep slope here that's not planted. And then it goes down on the other side. There's a bit of a cutout on the back. And it's very, so over here, but you get vastly different microclimates if you're south facing, if you're north facing, in the morning and the afternoon, when things warm up versus when they cool down is really drastically different. Like, I can run over in this part of the vineyard in the Chardonnay block an hour later than I can run in the Cab block in the middle of the summer, because it's just that much cooler for that much later. But everything cools down at the same time. So microclimates are exceedingly important. And if you optimize your vineyard for all the different areas that you have, the diversity is phenomenal. It's really, really interesting. It's fascinating. And as a winemaker, it's fun because, I mean, who gets to make world-class Riesling and world-class Cabernet from the same region, let alone the same vineyard? I mean, you pretty much have to be in Washington.
Yeah. Yeah. So Kerry, if you're an interested wine consumer and you're looking at Washington, maybe you don't have a lot of experience with Washington wines, is there stylistic markers that you would say would be typical? Are there characteristics, I should say, that are just commonplace that really make Washington unique from other places around the world?
Yeah, I think, and that's a great question. I think that the thing about Washington is that because we have these warm days, we get ripeness in fruit. But because we also have the cool nights and a shorter season, so we can't do extended hang time. Like Cliff says, it reminds him of Lodi. in Lodi, you don't have the cool nights that we have to the degree, and you can let things hang so much longer, and you get a lot more ripeness. So what happens is the grapes are ripening. You tend to, either in a warm climate, you get fruit, you get richness, but the trade-off is you lose acidity. In a cooler region, you get complexity and freshness and nuance, but the trade-off for that is you don't have the ripe fruit. And in Washington, we can get both. And so, like, if we're looking at Syrah, for example, it's not as hot as it is in Australia. It's not as hot as it is in Paso. Those are hot regions. It's not as cold as it is in Cornas or in Hermitage. So we get more fruit than they're going to get in Cornas. We get more acidity, more freshness than you get in Australia. So they're well balanced, and you have this really unique combination of ripe fruit and freshness. So the wines they're more light on their feet. You can have rich, bold reds that aren't heavy and flabby. And I think that combination and that balance is really special in Washington.
You want to get into the tasting?
Sure.
Okay, so we have 4 wines, and we'll go through this, and I don't know if you have slides that show the labels. If not, Kerry will just hold it up to the camera. Everything that is being shown here in this live stream, if you look at the description, once this is posted on my YouTube channel, there's a link to the winery. So if you have any questions, or if you're interested in any of the wines, you can follow up in that manner. I should also make note, I missed this from the early on in the live stream. Once it's posted on my channel, I'll go in and I'll add chapter markers. So if there's certain topics that you'd like to revisit, this will give you an easy access to whatever it is that you're looking for. All right, Kerry, you ready for some Riesling?
Always. I think Riesling is perfect breakfast wine. And since it is morning here, it's the way to be. So, like I was saying, the Riesling are actually the oldest vines in the vineyard. They were planted in the early 80s because our hill it's so rocky, and kind of the beginning of the Washington wine industry is places where apples struggled. There's the bottle. Where apples struggled, you planted vines. And in the 80s, it was Riesling. And so we named the vineyard De Brule Vineyard. Was a family name at the time. And the winery is Cote Bonneville because so many people were vineyard designating our vineyard. It was one of the first in Washington to get vineyard designated. So Cote Bonneville is a family estate. And that is why the distinction between, and all of the labels are parts of the house. So we can look at the label after we taste the wine, because, Bob, I don't want you to have Riesling in front of you and not be tasting it. Just wouldn't be fair. Wouldn't be right.
Yeah, I'll get to it soon. So the other bit is tasting in the morning. And Kerry, you mentioned this as a winemaker. This is oftentimes when you prefer to taste. It's when your senses are most sharp. And if you're in any type of wine education program where tasting is one of the exam elements, almost for certain you will be tasting in the morning.
Well, I think there's a couple reasons. One, your senses are sharper, but 2, your brain is just fresher. And there's 2 parts to tasting. One is biological sensitivity and just what do you pick up? And then the other part of that is the analyzing it and saying, what am I going to do with this information? So if you're tasting for the MW, how am I going to position it? What am I going to write about it? If you're tasting as a winemaker, what am I going to, do I need to do anything with this wine? How do I put the blends together? Those things are all much fresher in the morning. And there is the distinction between tasting and drinking. And one of the reasons I like drinking Riesling in the morning is that this is a, so Cote Bonneville was founded to make classic styles that are basically as benchmarks of the Washington wine industry. And as a Mosel, this is a Mosel style Riesling. So it's lower alcohol. It's about 10% alcohol. And if you're going to drink all day, you have to start in the morning. So therefore, this is my breakfast wine. It's also really aromatic and fun and fresh and lively, and it's a great way to start your day.
So when we tasted this at the winery just a few weeks ago, you asked me a question and I missed by a country mile.
Mm-hmm.
And you asked me about grams of sugar, residual sugar per liter. And I came in at around half of what it actually is. And I think it would be an interesting point to talk about acidity and how acidity impacts the palate and actually reduces that impact of residual sugar.
Okay. Yeah. Because, well, I never like to tell people how much sugar is in the Riesling. Everybody always asks because they think, people think Riesling is sweet, especially because we make an off-dry style. So, and it can be cloying. But again, you go to Germany and there's all this Riesling with residual sugar that's balanced, that's just delicious. And how you do that is a balance of sweet and tart. And so the more acid you have, the more sugar you can have without it being cloying. And this is styled as a Spätlese Riesling. So it's got, we pick it earlier than many people in Washington used to, but definitely late harvest. It's easy to get to this level of ripeness in Washington because it is warmer than in the Mosel. And the reason I like it is because Spätlese, because Riesling changes so much. Like when it's cabinet level, you get all that lime and lemongrass, and it's just a freshness, and it's beautiful. And when they get really ripe, you get the Auslese kind of characteristics of stone fruits and when you're in that Spätlese, there's this like perfect area of Spätlese where you get both. You get the citrus, you get the pear, you get the stone fruits, but you also have like the great acidity. And stopping the fermentation where we do, just gives this beautiful balance of acidity and sweetness. And temperature also plays a role in this, because if you want the same bottle to taste more tart and less sweet, serve it colder. If you're pairing with something that you want a little more sugar to show, serve it a little bit warmer. And it's fun to see how temperature also plays with your perception of things as well.
I'll tell you that's an excellent point. The other is the age of the vines. This is one of the older Riesling vineyards.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that. When you look at older vines, lower yields, I'm a big proponent of this. I think it's one of the keys to really finding wines that are distinctive and have just much more depth and complexity. Touch on that, Kerry, please.
Well, when the vines are young, they're putting a lot of energy into growing the vine and developing the vine structures, and they don't spend as much time putting the energy into the fruit. And so as they get older, as they get more established, as those root structures get more established, there's so much more complexity. And there's not really a definition. Well, there's not a definition in the US for what old vines means.
Yeah.
Generally, what happens is vines are considered, the first 10 years, they're considered immature. And then usually once they hit 30, 40 years old, the yields start going down. So if you're farming for yields, people would pull these out and replant them to increase your yields. The other reason that vines don't get very old is either if you have the wrong variety in the wrong spot and you can't get the quality, you change the variety. If you're farming for production farming and 1 minute Chardonnay is in and the next minute Malbec is in and you're chasing trends, people planted lots of Chardonnay in the 90s, and then in the early 2000s, people decided they didn't like Chardonnay anymore. So a lot of that Chardonnay got ripped out and planted to Merlot. And then people decided that Merlot wasn't the hottest thing, and Malbec came in, or Syrah. And so if your vines aren't good enough to be the Chardonnay that people are still drinking when Chardonnay acreage gets reduced. So it's kind of it's also sort of a just natural evolution that as the industry evolves and drinking patterns change, the vines that stay in the ground the longest tend to be the best blocks in the best sites, and the vines are getting more mature. And it's one of those and is a really good point of old vines.
Are there specific markers that are typical of Washington State?
In Riesling?
Yes.
I think in general, like I was saying, because it is a riper region, for Riesling, it is a warmer region. That stone fruit is always like, there's always this peachy kind of pear note to the Riesling, balanced with really nice acidity.
And you said the pH on this was under 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you're into some of the wine geek part of it, that's quite rare. I mean, under 3 is extremely low.
My pH meter was giving me issues, so I took it to the brewery to just check it, the local brewery, and they thought I broke their pH meter because they'd never seen anything that low ever.
Yeah, crazy. Well, I think the wine's fantastic. Very good length on the back palate, and there's concentration to it without being weighty, without being heavy. I think this wine is really impressive. And this was the first wine that we tasted when we got together some weeks ago. The second wine was the Syrah, which we're getting into next. And I'm a huge proponent of Washington State Syrah. And it's a little bit of it can be a little bit challenging because Syrah is not exactly the most trendy grape variety in today's wine world. But if you're seeking out wines that are very distinctive, and we'll get into the characteristics of this wine in just a moment, I think Washington State Syrah can be absolutely incredible. And this one's just massively impressive.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Syrah does really well here, and it's such a great grape for expression again of place that it's fun to taste the different areas. The label on this one is in the at the Cote Bonneville estate. There's a gazebo kind of arbor in the yard that is for entertaining, and those columns are just really beautiful. So that is that's what's on the label. And I was talking earlier about microclimates and how important it is. And I have a picture here standing at the top of the Syrah, and you can see they kind of go, and this is looking south. You can see these vines go off at an angle at a west-southwest sort of orientation. The Chardonnay here is north-facing, so again, significantly cooler. And then these green vines, that's the Cabernet that goes down the hill and is on the south-facing part of the hillside. And this is in the fall, so you can see that the vines are starting to go into dormancy. But it's so obvious how they're different. The vines are responding differently. The microclimates are different. And that, again, is one of the things about Washington that is so fascinating. And they say that Syrah likes a view. And one of the important things about Washington, vineyard placement everywhere in the world, but especially in Washington, if you're up higher on the hillsides, it's good for frost control. You don't have to worry as much about freezes because that air drainage is really important. Cold air is heavy and it will fall down to the bottom of the valley. And also there's a lot more soil in the valley floor. So when you get up on the hillsides, you get vines that struggle more. You get less soil, you get less water holding capacity, you get less vigor, which leads to smaller berries, smaller clusters, more intensity of of the fruit and the flavors, more color, all those things that you get when you have steep hillside vines, just like everywhere in the world.
Great. So I see we have some comments coming in. If you have any specific questions, please post. We'll try to get through as many of those as we possibly can. Kerry, take us through the Syrah. This is a 2021 vintage, by the way.
Yeah, this is young. I think we make wines to age, and I usually drink them when I have a case of like 2013 that I'm currently enjoying right now. I'm working my way through.
2013 Syrah.
Yeah, it's delicious.
So take us through a little bit of the evolution. When you think of Syrah in Washington State, starting point, mid, maybe when it starts to develop some of those tertiary characteristics, what would you expect to see?
Well, in the Yakima Valley, this is different in different parts of Washington because we were talking earlier about different AVAs, and especially Walla Walla in the Rocks District, Milton Freewater. You get very, very different. You get very different characteristics. You get very different. The pHs of those wines are significantly higher, so you get very different aging characteristics. And one of the great things about Yakima with the basalt soils is everything has low pH. Everything has that good backbone for excellent aging. When they're younger, they have more of the primary fruit. And I think our Syrah is so pretty because in addition to the fruit, there's always a very floral element like violets and lavender that
Absolutely.
is just, it's so pretty. And it makes this wine just, I mean, in a way, it's hard for me to talk about this wine because I love Syrah and I love this Syrah. And like many wines, as they develop and mature, some of those primary fruit flavors, there's so much fruit in Syrah that as the primary fruit flavors tend to start to diminish and you get all the other complexing tertiary notes, there's still plenty of fruit. So they're still fresh. And with that acidity and low pH, they're healthy, they're bright, there's enough backbone and structure that and also, one of these days, if you want to talk about aging, we can do a vertical tasting because I think verticals at Cote Bonneville are really interesting. We sell fruit based on allocated designated rows. So, and everything is very small production at Cote Bonneville. So these wines all come from the same rows in the vineyard every year. And so the difference of what, what's the difference between a 2013 and a 2021 is basically it's the vintage year and the age of the vines, but everything else has been very consistent through that time.
What's the oak treatment?
Oak treatment. So all of the oak in the winery is French. We use a variety of coopers. And for this Syrah, I use all second use oak. So it's not overtly oaky. But they're not neutral. They're not completely neutral barrels either.
Got it. Okay. I think this wine is tremendous. And you think of some Syrah, you mentioned earlier, you mentioned Cornas. I think of Cornas oftentimes as being just heavy, dense, very robust. It has this very almost like macho sort of character to it. This has more of a brightness, freshness on the palate. I'll tell you this is the type of wine I could drink quite a bit of, where something like Cornas is something where, hey, a glass of it is fantastic, but I'm probably not going to be drinking that all night long. I think this is tremendous. There's a question about the price on this, Kerry. Do you know that offhand?
It's around 70.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I make 150 cases of this a year, maybe. So they're all very limited out production. Like my entire winery is smaller than some people's small production wines.
Well, and that I think is also something that is interesting about Washington State. The history there was really one producer that dominated, and there's been some significant change. This is with Chateau Saint Michel, and what I'm seeing, and Kerry, I'd like to get your take on this. Smaller artisanal wineries that really have a sense of place. This is what a lot of people are looking for. So in my view, when I look at how the market is developing, not only in Washington, but really everywhere, it's all about the sense of place and having something that is unique to that identity. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that's the fun thing about wine, really, is a sense of place. Because if I wanted all my wine to taste the same, then then there's no discovery. There's no, I mean, that just takes all the fun out of it. And I think the challenge for Washington, in a lot of ways, is that we do have such small producers that sometimes it's harder to, if people don't have, now with web stores and being able to order things online, it's easier. But if you're in Georgia, you can't order Syrah for me in July. Like, you have to plan around it because it's too hot to ship it. So, I mean, we structured our wine club, because we send wine all over the country. We structured our wine club around shipping windows. But it is harder. It's harder when you can't just go down to your local wine shop and find all these small producers. That being said, the producers that are in different wine shops around the country and on different restaurant lists, they're usually worth seeking out, because we're getting more producers who are big enough to distribute nationally, or at least in certain markets, which is great, because Cote Bonneville is a great business plan. Like, it's a great business plan to make a small amount of wine that's crafted, that shows a sense of place, that ages well, that are really unique and interesting. But it's a hard industry plan. And so with the evolution of Washington, I think it's really exciting to be seeing more producers that are growing, getting big enough to go outside of the state, getting big enough to be in major markets, getting big enough to go to, a buddy of mine went to Pro Wine this year and then went to England. And we've sent some wine to Europe. I've sent wine to Australia. I've had people trying to import the wines to Japan. But we need more than just me. Like, and it's really exciting to be seeing more of these wines in more places. That being said, everybody in Washington, even what we consider big, by California standards, they're tiny. By Argentine standards, they're tiny. And so if you see these bottles in your local markets, it's a great opportunity, and you should try them. Plus, wines from Washington because there's a lot of people that don't necessarily know of them, they're often really great values. So if you see Washington wine, buy Washington wine.
Okay, let's get into the last two reds.
Sense of place.
And I think for a lot of people, when you're thinking Washington, oftentimes Bordeaux grape varieties is what comes to mind. So that's what we're getting into next. But there's an interesting twist with the two wines, because they have some age to them, and you have strong opinions on this.
Oh, I don't have any opinions, Bob.
Oh yeah, you do. Oh yeah, you do.
So the next two wines are, I think, very fascinating, because they have they're grown 50 yards apart. They're the same clones, the same, like, no rootstock. They're on their own roots. They are made in fairly similar ways. They're farmed with similar mentalities, but they're 50 yards apart. And this soil profile and this soil profile are completely distinctly different. And the aspect's different, the elevation's different, the vines grow differently, and the wines taste very different. And to have that kind of differential at 50 yards apart, it's just fascinating, and it's so cool. And then because, again, we'll go into aging, and I'll come back to the soil profile and the acidity and the basalt. So this is a basalt upthrust, because Washington, the hot spot that is Old Faithful, was at the Oregon, Idaho, Washington border and just spewed basalt. And where we're at, you can see in the background here, you can see Mount Rainier right there. And so the ancient Cascades would also, there were a lot of eruptions. So we have 40,000 feet of basalt. It's so heavy, it actually dented the crust of the earth in Washington. And then it's being upthrust. These hills behind are being pushed up as Oregon is rotating up into Washington, which is what gives us that east-west trending valley, because it's rotating the state and it's pushing up all these hills. So this part of the vineyard, the ancient Columbia River used to flow over this part of the vineyard. Plus we have all that basalt, and it's gotten pushed up. This part of the vineyard is in a hydrology wedge. There's 40,000 acres above it that drain down into this part of the vineyard. So we don't have a lot of rain, but over the millennia, when we've had significant rain events, we've had flooding from higher up in the hills down into this part of the vineyard. So this part of the vineyard has more fractured basalt, more cobblestone type soils, type rocks. And this has heterogeneous rock from the ancient Columbia River, and the river would flow and dry up and flow and dry up. So there's a white mineral crust. It's not technically limestone because it's not a riverbed, but it's the same compound. And so you have very different rock profile. You have that limestone, and you have a lot more basalt at a much higher level in the soil profile. So this is a lot rockier. So the difference between those two is both areas have good pHs. They're very healthy. They live for a long time. The wines are well made, if I do say so myself. And so because they're made with the intention of aging, one of my wine, like I said, I like the 13 Syrah. One of my wine clubs is set up to only send wines out that are 10 years old. Like, I don't send anything that's less than a decade old. So these are both too young to even be considered for that club. And I think watching wines age is just really, it's one of the fun things about drinking wine.
So the Carriage House is a 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What's your thoughts on this specific wine? When you taste it, what sort of impression do you get off of this?
So 17, because we're tasting the 17 and the 18, these are really fascinating vintages because they have the same temperature profiles, but the heat came at different times. So 17 was a cold spring, a warm summer, and a cool fall. And 18 was a warm spring, a cool summer, and a warm fall. So the 17, even though they sum up to the same thing, 17 presents as a much cooler vintage. So I think right now, the nuance, the complexity, all those sorts of savory elements, the dried herbs are coming into play in a way that's just really beautiful. I like this vintage right now. I think it's delicious. It was shy when it was young, and it's starting to come into its own and just be really in a beautiful drinking window right now. And I think it'll stay in this drinking window for a long time.
I opened all of the reds about now it's been about 2 hours. And this particular wine, this 17 Carriage House, when I first opened it, it was rather closed. It really was not showing a whole lot. It's like night and day difference now.
So I opened my Carriage House last night because I wanted a glass of wine for dinner, and I figured if I was going to have 4 bottles of wine open. And so yes, and you looked, when I told you I was going to do this, you thought I was nuts. And it's like decanting it overnight, and it's still beautiful. I mean,
I didn't think you were nuts. Come on now.
Debatable. But I think, we used to pour these before we opened our tasting room. in our historic train station, we used to taste at the production facility by appointment only. And if we didn't have that many people coming through, we would just leave the bottles on the counter. And we would pour the Cote, which, yes, the Côte Bonneville is our flagship wine. And we just call it the Côte Bonneville because when we started, we just had Cote and Carriage House. We'd have the Cote on the counter for a week in the tasting room, and it would be fine. And it would just get every day. You'd have people come in on Monday and they'd be like, oh, this is nice. And then by Friday, they'd be like, oh my God, this is so good, with the same bottle. Because they just
with no preservation at all.
put the cork in.
That was it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay. What's the blend on this wine, on the Carriage House?
Both of them are roughly 60% Cab, 40% Merlot. The Carriage House has a little bit of Cab Franc in that block. Mm-hmm. So there's about 5 to 10%. There's about 5 to 10% Cab Franc in the Carriage House as well.
Got it. Okay.
So 60, 45. And yes, I know that's more than 100, but I'm a retired engineer, and therefore my math doesn't need to be perfect.
All right. We'll ballpark it. Casey has a comment about the wine being available at Total. Is that true?
There are in some, depends on where you are. Not every Total.
Okay.
But some Totals.
Okay.
And I think you can get it on wine.com, and I think you can get it on, but sometimes because we're not in every market, if you can find it locally, that's great. Otherwise, now is the time of year when you can ship. And as Bob said, you can always get things on our website.
Right.
Because we ship just about everywhere in the U.S.
Okay. So wine 4, we have a 2018. Mm-hmm. All right. And you're talking about the vintage comparison of 17 to 18.
Yeah. The 17 is shy and reserved and introverted and takes a hot minute, as you mentioned, to warm up. The 18 was just a jazz hands vintage. It's like from the time it was young, from the time I bottled the 18, we bottled the 18s. The 18s have just been like, hello, I'm here. And they're so fruity and they're just jazzy. And it's not like they're massive fruit bombs. They're just fun and bright and jump out of your glass. And 18 was such a fun vintage. And like I said, they're the same heat profiles, but the night and day difference of how the vines express themselves.
So there's actually quite a significant difference between the 17 and 18 in terms of appearance.
Yes.
17 has much more of a developed appearance to it. You can see out at the edge of the glass, there's just the slightest bit of browning. Where on the 18, this looks incredibly youthful.
Mm-hmm. That also is a difference between. That's also a difference between just how much color and stable pigmentation you get in the grapes. When you're on that hillside, you have the yields on the hillside are half what they are in the Carriage House block. The berries are smaller, the clusters are smaller, the canopy is smaller, and so with the canopy being smaller, you get more sunlight in on the berries, which means you get more color development, which means you get more color extraction in the wines. And so really that's less about the vintage years than it is about the growing conditions and the wines themselves.
Got it. Okay. This has incredible concentration to it. There's just, and on the back palate, you still do get a fair amount of tannin, mm-hmm. but it's not coarse tannin. I mean, it's actually, it provides that added element of length and depth. But I get the feeling this wine could go for a long, long time.
Yep.
What do you
So
think?
these are the ones that we send out in that library club that are a minimum of 10 years old. And
What sort of aging potential are you looking at?
a couple of years ago, there were probably 2 years ago, I had a lot of people opening bottles and sending me pictures of just different, and people opened lots of different vintages that year. And one of the favorites consistently was the 06.
And what year was this?
2006.
No. When were people tasting it?
2 years ago.
Okay.
Because after I lost my mom, there were a lot of people opening bottles in honor of my mom and sending me pictures about this and talking about the different vintages and things. And 2006 was one of the ones that I heard the most. It just happened to be a year that a lot of people opened it.
Got it. Okay. So this library range that you have,
Mm-hmm.
people can actually purchase those if they're interested.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay.
When my parents started the winery, one of the goals of the winery was to show what Washington could do, because we started the winery in 2001. And in 2001, it was still the ancient history, Stone Ages of Washington wine. And not a lot of people were looking at making benchmark kind of wines. And so what did that mean? That meant you had to have a sense of place. You had to be classically styled. They had to be age worthy. They had to be well made. They had to fit in the global context of the world of wine. But a lot of people say that their wines will age, and then they'll pull out a 2023 and say, oh, this wine will last a long time. If your region is not known for age-worthy wines, because nobody's done it yet, nobody's been focusing on that. I mean, you make wines differently to age than you make them, like our train station wines, which aren't intended to lay down for a decade. I make those differently. I do things differently in the cellar. And because it was so far advanced of where the industry was at the time, we kept a big library to show people that these wines can age. And when there are people who are getting introduced to the potential of Washington wine, I think it's important that we had that big library of wines. Like, it's important to have a library so that you can actually you can prove this is where, the wines do have aging potential.
So Kerry, when you're approaching the winemaking piece of it, are you, not sure how to ask this, are you following a path that is more of your expertise in terms of what you feel is appropriate for the place? Or are you borrowing concepts that maybe you'd learned in California or something from Bordeaux, for instance? I mean, is there some sort of inspiration that provides a bit of a guideline?
Oh, of course. I mean, it has to be a yes and, because one of the challenges that when people come up from California, if they don't apply their practices to the sense of place. Oh, when Gallo came up to Washington, it was a disaster because they brought their California winemakers up and they assumed they didn't have to check the grapes for the yans, which is the amount of nitrogen that come in on the grapes. And in order to complete a fermentation, your yeast need enough protein functionally to grow up big and strong and complete the fermentation. And in California, that's not a problem. In Washington, it's often an issue. So if you don't check where you're at, you can run into problems. And so they learned very quick. Well, they learned the subsequent year that was something they had to check after they stuck a whole bunch of fermentations. And there are lots of things that you learn. It's like having a good education. You pick up tidbits from all the different places, and you should always keep learning. And at the same time, fundamentals are important. Like with everything, I feel like the more you go back to the fundamentals, the deeper you get into the fundamentals, the more winemaking's not hard. The hard part is paying attention to all of the right details at the right times in order to get where you want to go. I mean, it's kind of like being in shape. It's not hard to be it's not complicated to be in shape. It's hard to get out of bed every morning and go to the gym and work out and do it consistently and plan your workout so that you keep progressing. And like, it's not complicated. It's not simple, but it's not complicated if you know what you're doing.
So how long have you been the winemaker? What was your first vintage?
2009.
Okay, so from 2009 to the present day, has there been some sort of aha epiphany, some sort of I really need to change this? Has that happened?
I think that's a hard question to answer for two reasons. One is, are you familiar with the concept? There's like Maslow has the hierarchy of needs, and then there's a thing about competency. And when you don't know anything and you don't know how much you know versus you get to the other end and you're not even aware of how much you know. Like, I realized that so much of what I do is so completely internalized that it's like I take a lot for granted. And so I think in a way I would say there have been fewer aha moments than gradual like transitions of gaining a lot of, but I do think that one of the moments I had that was really, it was pretty profound was because I travel with my wine club. And we went probably in 2022 because it was right after COVID. We went to the Rhone, and I went and did a deep dive in Burgundy for a couple extra days ahead of time. And then I went to Lyon and met up with the rest of my group. And we went from Burgundy down through Provence, and which was so much fun. It was a great trip. I love traveling with my wine club because people are curious and they're interesting and they're nice and they're fun. And it's a great group of people. It's a great community to be in. And we got to Burgundy and with the group, and there was a winemaker who was tasting with us who was like, Washington, I am so excited about Washington. She goes, I really want to go to Washington. You guys can do so many things. You have so much freedom. You're so innovative. You're so dynamic. The quality that you have in Washington is so fantastic. And to hear that from producers in Burgundy was pretty exciting. And also, I think the other aha moment that I had in Burgundy is Burgundy, as much as everybody thinks Burgundy is complicated, Burgundy's friggin' easy. Like, Burgundy is so simple. You got mostly 2 grapes, 2 other minor ones, but mostly 2 grapes. Mm-hmm. And then you have Village, Premier Cru, Grand Cru. Like, it's all about the steepness of the hill. And if there's no limestone in the soil, they plant Pinot. And if there's limestone in the soil, they plant Chardonnay because Pinot doesn't do well on limestone. Like, Burgundy's simple. That's it. That's all you need to know. And I mean, that's a little more in depth if you want to get super geeky about the different villages. But like, Washington's so much more complicated than that. There's so much more nuance. There's so much more, like, you can get into the weeds pretty easily. But it's kind of one of those, like, the things that make wine great in Burgundy are the same things that make wine great in Yakima or anywhere else, right? Like, if you're higher up on the hillside, you have less soil. At the bottom of the slope, you have more vegetables and you have food crops. The higher up on the hillsides you go, the better your grapes get. You get too high up, and in Burgundy, you have oak trees. In Washington, you have sagebrush. But in both places, there's this band of the hillside that's just perfect. And that's where your highest quality grapes grow. And it was so, and I don't know that this like ties into like, here's the winemaking change. I think it was more the concepts and the biology and the geology. I mean, the fundamentals are the fundamentals. If you have too much soil, plant your vegetable crops. If you want the right amount of soil, you want the right exposure, I think it was, the other great thing about being estate bottled is that the more I can do in the vineyard, I'm a good engineer. I'm fundamentally a very lazy human. And if I can work less for the same result, I will do it at all, like 100%. It is easier to share wine with you when I make really good wine. It's easier to make really good wine when I have really great grapes. If I want to change something in the vineyard, in the winery, that's like work. If I can do something different in the vineyard, it makes my life easier for the rest of the process. So I don't know. I think it was probably 10, 15 years ago, we started doing things where it was like, I was just absorbing information from a variety of sources, and it's like, well, let's try this in the vineyard and then see how it carries through. And the more I can do the work, the winemaking in the vineyard, and the less I have to actually do in the winery, that's the holy grail.
Yeah, that's a story you hear over and over again, no matter where you're at around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So Carl had a question about certifications.
Oh, we used to have certifications. We let them lapse. We used to be certified. We farm sustainably. We used to be certified by, I don't know, we had Salmon Safe, we had Live, we had whatever, but they were, we let them lapse because Live at the time was started in Bordeaux and came into Oregon, and then they came up to Washington. And what's sustainable in Oregon and what's sustainable in Washington, because the environment is so different, they're not the same thing. So the things that they were saying you had to do for the certification weren't the best practices for our region. So to maintain the certification, we would have had to give up the best practices, which seems silly. And I mean, you can say, well, then you go in and you change the certification. But I am a small business. At the time, it was me, my mom, and my dad, and we have a vineyard crew, but like there's limited capacity to do. If I'm going to do everything I am doing and like redevelop the certification, like there's just not enough hours in the day. And to put that much focus on changing the certification also means I take my eye off the ball on making wine. And I'm a firm believer in do less better, because chasing squirrels is how you take your eye off the ball of executing really well. And so a couple of years ago, they came out with the Sustainable Washington certification, which was developed specifically for Washington. And again, that was, it didn't make sense at the time because my mom got sick. And given the choice of pursuing a certification or spending my time in the hospital with my mom, I picked the hospital. So, because, we're all humans. And so certifications have never been top on the list of my priorities. My dad is big on certifications. And so we are talking about getting recertified. I just go back to how many hours are there in a day, and where do you spend them? And I'd like to spend the hour here with you, Bob, and with everybody who showed up.
It's so appreciated. So one last question here from Rich, and he had a question around climate change, and he said over the last 10 years. So what's your take on that issue, which seems to be the topic everywhere now?
Well, somebody told me the other day that Bordeaux has bud break already this year. I've got some friends in the Mosel who have had massive flooding in their cellars.
That was a major news story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when I was in grad school, I had a couple of friends studying climate change, and actually the way the models show that the Yakima Valley is one of the places that is best positioned, the Columbia Valley is one of the places that's best positioned to deal with climate change going forward, because a lot of the massive, I don't know that we want to go too far into the geekiness of how weather works, but my brother's a pilot, and he told me that I was an idiot who didn't understand how weather works. And I said, well, let's fix that. And he went and grabbed another bottle of wine. And then I got the full education on how weather works. Love my brother. But because we'll use, for example, the Gulf Stream. You remember when it froze in Texas a couple of years ago? Because the Gulf Stream, which has all that Arctic air, went all the way down to Texas. Well, if we look back at the map, this Columbia Valley you have the Cascades and you have the Rockies. So the Gulf Stream is always going, we do get atmospheric rivers, we do get things. What climate change means is more variability. And the reason that we are set up perfectly for more variability is, like I said, we're not super hot. If you're in a hot region and it gets hotter, you're in trouble. If you're in a cold region and you have a late freeze or an earlier freeze in the fall or a later freeze in the spring, you're done. We have a little more capacity because we're not at the edges. We're not super hot. We're not super cold. So being in the middle, we have this ability to flex. The other thing, it is a challenge to say you do so many things so well. It is much easier for people to understand that in Napa, you grow Cabernet, in Oregon, you grow Pinot, in Argentina, you grow Malbec, in Australia, you grow Syrah. That's easy. The challenge with that is what happens when you're growing Cabernet in Bordeaux and it gets warm for Cabernet, and so you start allowing things like Touriga Nacional. What does that mean? So, and what does it mean if you're Napa Cabernet and all of a sudden it gets too hot to grow Cabernet effectively, so you need different grapes, or you need something like Tempranillo, which holds its acidity better, because your climates are just so different. And so for Washington, the fact that so many of the things that we grow have enough ripeness, but because of the basalt in the soil profile, we have the acidity and the pH. And the fact that is consistent between Riesling and Cabernet gives us a lot of flexibility and future-proofs us as well. So I think Washington's the future of wine in general, globally, personally, looking at the data.
So one final question for you, Kerry. What do you see as the future for Washington State wine?
I think the future of Washington State wine is to continue to do what Washington does really, really well, which are, we have places where you can get, like in the Horse Heavens, where you have great production vineyards and you get good consistency of quality at more approachable price points. We're never going to be an entry-level region. It just costs too much to grow grapes here. We don't get the yields that you do in a place like Lodi, but you can do table wines at a really high quality price point, a really high quality across the board. And I think at the top end of Washington, it's to continue to do what we are doing, which is wines in a sense of place, wines that are well made. I think the exciting thing, when I came home, I was one of the most educated, experienced, well-traveled winemakers in the state of Washington, which is great unless you're 30. That is not a good industry plan. I went to Davis right? Like, that's not okay. I went to Davis because I would have been in the first class at WSU. And they wanted me to go to WSU, but I said, I don't want to be your guinea pig. I want to go, if I can go to Davis, why would I be your guinea pig? Mm-hmm. And it is exciting to see more programs, Walla Walla Community College has a good program, but it's a community college. I guarantee you organic chemistry was not a prerequisite for going to the community college. But we're getting more good programs we're getting more community college programs, we're getting the university programs, we're getting more educated people, we're getting more international investment, and we're getting more winemakers who have traveled, we're getting more people who are coming in from other parts of the world. And I think going back to Washington has so much potential. It is so young. It is so exciting though, because there's so much potential. There's so many great grapes. As people get more experienced and as they do a better job of, and I don't mean this as any individual winemaker, but I mean as an industry, as we do a better job of identifying who we are and what we do well and what we want to do, it's the future of Washington wine. Is so exciting.
Fantastic. So I've gone back to the fourth wine.
Yeah.
And it's constantly evolving. And in terms of the aroma, there is more intensity, more breadth. Look, I'm having a little taste now. Tonight, I'll share it with some friends. And too bad for them, they're not going to see the evolution of where it was when it was first opened to the time when at that point, it'll be open like 10 hours. It's sensational. Kerry, so insightful. I see the comments are positive. That's all great. And look, I'm always looking for guests that can bring a degree of insight and expertise. And you've just knocked it out of the park. So thank you so much for that. And any other, and I didn't give you any grief. That's our usual interaction. So any last comments?
I think last comments, just keep an eye on Washington. Specifically, I think anything you can find that's vineyard designated is going to be like, those are the people looking for sense of place. And that is, we've gotten more AVAs and things are getting a little more subdivided. But if you see Washington wine, if you see Washington wines the smaller the subregion, the more specificity of sense of place you get, because Washington's a big place.
So, question: are the wines sold in Denmark?
They used to be. I doubt there is any at the moment because COVID broke some of my distribution, including to Europe, and I haven't had a chance to. But okay, there might still be some around somewhere because we were in Denmark for a long time.
Okay, well, I'll give you I'll follow up with the person. If you have some specifics, I'll follow up with them one-on-one.
Okay, that'd be great.
Kerry, again, thank you so much. This was fantastic, very insightful. And I'm so appreciative that you agreed to do this just a few weeks ago. This was kind of spur of the moment.
Well, and it's been fun. I'm glad to share the story, and I'm glad people are excited and interested. So,
well, again, for everyone who's tuned in, thank you very much. This will go on my YouTube channel shortly after. I'll go in later today. I'll add those chapter markers. If you have any questions or comments, please post it, and Kerry or myself will follow up. As always, thank you very much. And there are many, many more live streams coming. So hope to see you again before too long. Cheers. Thanks again. Bye-bye.